Hello and welcome to Chapter 7. Chapter 7 covers energy metabolism. Included are the learning objectives for this chapter. Metabolism. Metabolism is the sum total of all chemical reactions in cells. Energy metabolism includes reactions by which the body obtains and expends energy from food. It's how the body uses food to meet its needs. Cells are the sites of metabolic reactions. Of note, liver cells are the most versatile and most metabolically active. Energy is the capacity to do work. There are many forms of energy. In the body, heat energy maintains a constant body temperature. Mechanical energy moves muscles. Electrical energy sends nerve impulses, and chemical energy stored in foods and in the body power many activities of cells. This is what a typical cell looks like. The body's made up of trillions of cells. Cells are the site of metabolic reactions. And again, liver cells are the most versatile and metabolically active. Anabolic and catabolic reactions compared. Anabolic is buildup and catabolic is to break down. Anabolic reactions require energy and put things together. Smaller molecules come together and to form larger molecules. You can see at the top portion of this slide, you have the first reaction in blue, which is glucose and glucose coming together to form glycogen. This requires energy. The middle option, that yellow color, is glycerol and fatty acids, again coming together, requiring energy to form triglycerides. And the last anabolic reaction example is in red, and that's when you bring amino acids together, requiring energy to form protein. Catabolic reactions release energy as they break down large molecules into smaller ones. Examples are on the bottom half of the slide. So you see the opposite occurring. You start with glycogen, and it breaks down to glucose, and that breakdown releases energy. Additionally, you can see that with triglycerides, which get broken down into glycerol and fatty acids, and protein getting broken down into amino acids. Please pause the presentation momentarily and see if you can match these appropriately. So on the left-hand column, you have A, uses energy to build compounds, and that matches with C, anabolism. B are the most metabolically active of body cells, matches with D, liver. C, how the body obtains and uses energy from food, matches with A, energy metabolism. And lastly, D, breaks compounds and releases energy, matches with B, catabolism. Again, please pause this presentation momentarily to see if you can answer the questions appropriately. Carbohydrates are broken down during digestion to form glucose, as well as other monosaccharides. 2. Fats or triglycerides are broken down to form glycerol and fatty acids. 3. Proteins are broken down into amino acids. And 4. These are examples of catabolic reactions. ATP, or adenosine triphosphate. You have an adenosine molecule and 3 phosphate groups. ATP is very important because it both captures and releases energy. Some of the energy released during the breakdown of glucose, glycerol, fatty acids, and amino acids is captured in ATP. ATP releases energy when one or two of the phosphate groups break off during hydrolysis. In this way, ATP provides the energy that powers activity of living cells. If you note those red squiggly lines between phosphate groups, those signify high energy bonds. Energy is released when these bonds are broken. Capture and release of energy by ATP. As I said, ATP captures and releases energy. Here, it's described as a rechargeable battery. ATP gives energy and it transforms to ADP, adenosine diphosphate. ADP requires energy so that it can form back into ATP. Oftentimes, the hydrolysis of ATP occurs at the same time as a reaction will use energy. This is known as a coupled reaction. In essence, the body uses ATP to transfer energy released during catabolic reactions to power anabolic reactions that require energy. Almost half of the energy is lost as heat, while the other half the body successfully converts the chemical energy of food to the chemical energy of ATP. Here is a short quiz if you'd like to pause momentarily to try to answer on your own. ATP is the high energy compound that powers all activities in living cells. This compound contains 3 phosphate groups. The bonds between the phosphate groups are readily hydrolyzed. This releases energy. Again, please pause the presentation momentarily and try to answer. Coupled reactions are when energy is simultaneously consumed by reactions as energy is produced. When the body converts food energy to cellular energy, almost half of it is lost as heat. Before we get into metabolic reactions, I'll mention briefly helpers in metabolic reactions. Enzymes help facilitate metabolic reactions, and coenzymes help the enzymes. Without a coenzyme, an enzyme cannot function. Some B vitamins serve as coenzymes that participate in energy metabolism. They help with the energy metabolism of glucose, glycerol, fatty acids, and amino acids. Simplified overview of energy-yielding pathways. This image shows how protein, carbohydrates, and fat can be broken down to acetyl-CoA, which then enters the TCA cycle. The TCA cycle, also known as the Krebs cycle or citric acid cycle, is a series of metabolic reactions that break down acetyl-CoA to carbon dioxide and hydrogen atoms. This releases hydrogen atoms and their electrons, which are carried by coenzymes to the electron transport chain, where energy is harnessed or captured. The TCA cycle and electron transport chain have central roles in energy metabolism. Nutrients for energy. We all know carbohydrates, protein, and fat are used by the body for energy to fuel activities. However, not all parts of these can be converted to glucose, which is needed by the red blood cells and central nervous system. Amino acids and glycerol can be converted to pyruvate, which can make glucose. Fatty acids are converted to acetyl-CoA and cannot make glucose. Now, I didn't talk about how many carbons, but which can and which cannot make glucose. So we have A, pyruvate, which matches with B, a 3-carbon structure, and C, it can make glucose. Acetyl-CoA matches with A, a 2-carbon structure, and D, it cannot make glucose. Please pause the presentation and see if you can answer these independently. Glycerol and amino acids can provide glucose because they can be converted to pyruvate. Fatty acids are converted to acetyl-CoA. Acetyl-CoA is the compound that enters the TCA cycle. Energy is harnessed through the electron transport chain. Glucose to pyruvate. Glycolysis, also known as glucose splitting. The metabolic breakdown of glucose to pyruvate. One glucose creates 2 pyruvate molecules. Hydrogen atoms and their electrons are carried to the electron transport chain. Of note, pyruvate can be converted back to glucose. If needed, liver cells, and to some extent kidneys, can make glucose again from pyruvate in a process similar to the reversal of glycolysis. Pyruvate has 2 options. It can convert to lactate or acetyl-CoA. When the body needs energy quickly, like during a sprint, pyruvate is converted to lactate anaerobically, or without oxygen. This supplies the body with energy quickly, but cannot be sustained for long, only a few minutes at most. Or when the body needs energy for a longer time, like jogging, the body converts pyruvate to acetyl-CoA, which requires oxygen, and this can be sustained for a longer period of time. Pyruvate to lactate. Coenzymes carry hydrogens from glycolysis to the electron transport chain. If the electron transport chain cannot accept these hydrogens, which can occur if there is insufficient oxygen or not enough mitochondria, pyruvate can accept the hydrogens. When pyruvate accepts hydrogens, it converts pyruvate to lactate. This reaction occurs during high-intensity activities, produces ATP quickly, causes lactate accumulation in muscles. The accumulation of lactate in muscles coincides with, but does not cause, the drop in blood pH, burning pain, and fatigue associated with exercise. In fact, making lactate from pyruvate removes 2 hydrogen ions, which decreases acidity and improves performance of tired muscles. Cori cycle is a recycling process, and we'll talk about that on the next slide. Cori cycle is a recycling process where lactate is transported from the muscles to the liver, where it is changed back to glucose and then returned to muscles. The muscles cannot just convert lactate to glucose itself because it lacks the necessary enzymes. Now let's talk about the conversion of pyruvate to acetyl-CoA, which is an aerobic reaction requiring oxygen. When a cell needs energy and oxygen is available, pyruvate enters the mitochondria. Once there, a carbon group is removed from pyruvate and the remaining compound bonds with a molecule of CoA, becoming acetyl-CoA. The conversion of pyruvate to acetyl-CoA is irreversible. The carbon group removed from pyruvate becomes carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is released into the blood, circulated to the lungs, and breathed out. This image is on page 205 of the text, and it shows the conversion of pyruvate to acetyl-CoA. I want you to remember that this conversion is irreversible. The paths of pyruvate and acetyl-CoA. Arrows show you in which direction reactions can occur, many of which are reversible. Note that pyruvate to acetyl-CoA is not reversible, and fatty acids cannot make glucose. Some amino acids are glucogenic, meaning they can make glucose, and others are ketogenic, which are converted to acetyl-CoA. Glucose enters the energy pathway. Question number 1. One glucose yields how many pyruvates? Question number 2. One glucose yields how many acetyl-CoA? The answer for both is 2. One glucose yields 2 pyruvates and one glucose yields 2 acetyl-CoA. Glycerol and fatty acids. Remember that triglycerides or fat is broken down to glycerol and 3 fatty acids. Glycerol to pyruvate. Glycerol easily converts to glucose or to pyruvate and then acetyl-CoA because it's structurally similar to pyruvate. Fatty acids to acetyl-CoA occurs through fatty acid oxidation. Fatty acid oxidation is when fatty acids are taken apart. 2 carbons are split from the fatty acid at a time, and the 2-carbon fragment combines with a molecule of CoA to form acetyl-CoA. As we know, acetyl-CoA cannot make glucose, and therefore fatty acids cannot make glucose. Glycerol can make glucose, fatty acids cannot make glucose. Please pause this presentation momentarily and see if you can answer the questions appropriately. Glycerol can be converted to glucose or pyruvate. In the process of fatty acid oxidation, fatty acids are taken apart 2 carbon fragments at a time. They then combine with a molecule of CoA to form acetyl-CoA. As this occurs, hydrogens and electrons are released and carried to the electron transport chain. Amino acids. Deamination. Amino acids lose their nitrogen-containing amino group. This must occur before amino acids enter metabolic pathways. Amino acids convert to pyruvate, which can provide glucose. Amino acids can convert to acetyl-CoA, which cannot make glucose, but can provide energy or make body fat. Amino acids enter the TCA cycle directly, which can generate both energy and/or glucose. So those are the potential amino acid pathways. Unlike fat, protein is a good source of glucose when carbohydrates are not available. Breaking down amino acids, please pause the presentation momentarily and see if you can answer the questions independently. Before amino acids can enter the metabolic pathway, deamination must occur. This removes the nitrogen-containing amino group. Some amino acids enter energy pathways after being converted to pyruvate, others as acetyl-CoA. Others enter the TCA cycle or citric acid cycle directly. Amino acids converted to pyruvate can make glucose. Here is a review or a summary slide for you to look over. Final steps of energy metabolism. Thus far, we have discussed macronutrient breakdown to acetyl-CoA. Acetyl-CoA has two main options, to generate ATP or to make fat. Now, the TCA cycle is the final common metabolic pathway for carbohydrates, fat, and amino acids. This reaction occurs in the inner compartment of the mitochondria. Oxaloacetate starts the TCA cycle by joining with acetyl-CoA. Oxaloacetate must be available for acetyl-CoA to enter. It's a 4-carbon compound that becomes a 6-carbon compound when combined with acetyl-CoA. It then drops off 1 carbon and then another carbon, returning to its 4-carbon oxaloacetate. This causes the TCA cycle to follow a circular pathway because oxaloacetate is needed in the first step and is synthesized in the last step of the TCA cycle. However, note the acetyl-CoA goes in one direction only. It's not regenerated. The oxaloacetate then picks up another acetyl-CoA. As compounds in the TCA cycle lose a carbon to carbon dioxide, hydrogen ions and their electrons are taken to the electron transport chain by coenzymes. These coenzymes include B vitamins, niacin, and riboflavin. They act like taxis because they pick up something and drop them off at another location. The electron transport chain captures energy in the high energy bonds of ATP. Coenzymes deliver electrons to the electron transport chain from TCA cycle, glycolysis, and fatty acid oxidation. The electron transport chain consists of a series of proteins that serve as electron carriers, which are found on the inner membrane of the mitochondrion. Electron carriers pass electrons down until they reach oxygen. Oxygen accepts the electrons and combines with hydrogen to form water. Hydrogen ions flow downhill from an area of higher concentration to lower concentration, which helps power the synthesis of ATP. The rush of hydrogens back into the inner compartments of mitochondria powers the synthesis of ATP. Energy is captured in ATP. ATP leaves the mitochondria, enters cytoplasm, where it can be used for energy. Final steps of energy metabolism. Please pause the presentation and see if you can answer this question yourself. The TCA cycle takes place in the inner compartment of the mitochondria. It is a circular path. This is because a 4-carbon compound called oxaloacetate is needed for the first step and is synthesized in the last step. Please pause this slide as well to see if you can answer independently. The electron transport chain captures energy in the high energy bonds of ATP. The electron transport chain is a series of proteins that carry electrons. Oxygen accepts electrons. This combines with hydrogen atoms to form water. The calorie per gram secret revealed. Because fat has many carbon-hydrogen bonds that can be readily oxidized, it can send numerous hydrogen and electrons to the electron transport chain where it produces ATP or energy. Because fat has more carbon-hydrogen bonds, it can produce more ATP, therefore producing more energy than carbohydrates or protein. One glucose molecule yields 30 to 32 ATP when completely oxidized versus 129 ATP when a fatty acid is completely oxidized. Pick the most correct statement. Energy is needed, A, all the time. Feasting, excess energy. Metabolism favors fat formation, regardless of excess from protein, fat, or carbohydrates. Excess protein. Protein must first be used in all of its roles within the body, so tissues, hormones, etc., and then any excess gets converted to fat. Excess carbohydrate. Carbohydrate gets used as energy, fills glycogen stores, then excess gets converted to fat. Excess fat is the most direct and efficient conversion. The body easily turns dietary fat into body fat. This image from page 215 of the text is a good summation of what happens to carbohydrate, protein, and fat components in feasting versus fasting. I'll let you all review that independently. Energy balance during fasting. Note there is a difference between fasting and starvation. If you choose not to eat, it's a fast. If it's not a choice, it's considered starvation. Energy is needed all the time, even during periods of rest and sleep. Normally, we eat periodically to stay fueled. In an effort to conserve body tissue, hormones will slow metabolism and reduce energy output. Symptoms of starvation include physical symptoms like wasting, slowed heart rate, decreased metabolism, decreased body temperature, organ failure, and a compromised immune system. Psychological symptoms include depression, anxiety, and food-related dreams. Fasting supports weight loss, but it isn't always the best option for fat loss. Fasting resulted in some weight loss, but not more than other standard weight loss plans. It's not overly harmful, but limited research has shown improved body weight, blood lipids, and blood glucose. Please pause this presentation momentarily to see if you can answer these questions independently. Following a meal, glucose, glycerol, and fat are used as needed. The rest is stored. Fasting refers to when someone chooses not to eat, compared to starvation when they have no choice. The body doesn't distinguish between these states. When energy is needed, the body draws on its stores of fat and glycogen. When the body shifts from fed to fasting, the body relies heavily on glycogen and fat stores for energy. Remember, red blood cells in the brain needs glucose for energy. To get glucose during a fast, amino acids that yield pyruvate are used for gluconeogenesis, in which case you have a breakdown of body proteins. As fasting continues, the body adapts and produces an alternate energy source from fatty acids called ketone bodies. These ketone bodies help meet most of the brain and nervous system's energy needs after about 10 days of fasting. While some areas of the brain still require glucose, this does slow down the rate of protein breakdown. Ketosis, which is the undesirably high concentration of ketones in blood and urine, induces appetite loss. Low carbohydrate diets. You have the ketogenic diet, low carbohydrate diet that makes the body react similar to fasting. So it breaks down glycogen stores and creates ketone bodies. Weight loss initially related to glycogen, protein, and fluid losses. Weight loss is usually a lot or significant in the beginning, but will eventually plateau. Loss of weight versus loss of fat. Studies have found that fat losses on ketogenic diets are no greater than on other diets providing the same number of calories. Ketogenic diets have been used to treat epilepsy in both children and adults. Potential negative side effects include nausea, fatigue, especially if physically active, constipation due to the lack of consumption of fiber from fruits, vegetables, and whole grains, low blood pressure, elevated uric acid, which may exacerbate kidney disease and cause inflammation of the joints in those predisposed to gout, stale, foul taste in the mouth or bad breath, having that fruity or acetone breath as they call it, and in pregnant women, it can cause fetal harm and stillbirth. Please pause this presentation momentarily to see if you can match these appropriately. A, gluconeogenesis matches with C, new glucose made from amino acids. B, glycogen and protein breakdown matches with A, increased urine production. C, ketones matches with D, incomplete fat breakdown. And D, glycogen matches with B, used first. And this concludes Chapter 7, Energy Metabolism.